for coming. Can you hear me? Is it coming through the, whatever, I'll yell. Okay. My name's Kylie, and I'm in charge of the West Coast version of the Blue Collar Post Collective. And Matt's going to be moderating today, but I just wanted to kind of introduce this. I wrote an article a few years ago called Mental Health and Creativity on creativecow.net, and you can go read it if you want to. And it was actually inspired by a couple of people that are really important to me that suffer from diagnosed mental illnesses. And I was just so concerned about this in our field that I wanted to write about it and see what other people thought. And to my surprise, it was really, it resonated with the community way more than I thought. Everyone wanted to participate in this discussion. It was like everyone was thinking about it, but nobody wanted to be the first person to say something about it. As far as I know, there's never been a panel for post-production about mental health. So Blue Collar Post Collective wants to be the first person to say something about this and have a discussion. So just out of curiosity, just a show of hands, who in here has either dealt with mental illness or knows somebody that deals with those issues? Nearly everyone in the room, of course. And how many of you have ever worked for an employer and when things really got going, you felt like your well-being wasn't their first priority? Again, everyone in there. So that's what we're going to talk about today, that and more. So thank you so much for coming. Please do participate in the discussion. I think Matt is open to questions yelled out. If you don't want to say it, you can tweet it, BCPCWest hashtag. And thank you for coming. And we have one microphone for you guys because we're a nonprofit. So you have to pass it around. So you can have it first. So.
Hello.
Hi.
I get my own mic.
Okay.
Can you guys hear me okay? All right. Thank you guys all for showing up. It's my pleasure to get to moderate this panel. Thanks for the intro, Kylie. I just want to start real quick. Tell us who you are, one sentence what you do. Go.
My name is Shane Badham, and I'm a therapist, a marriage and family therapist.
My name is Natalie Beauchamp, and I'm an assistant editor in scripted television.
I'm Chris Visser, and I'm an assistant editor. Just recently transitioned into being an assistant editor in Indie Features.
My name's Kira Prince, and I am a dailies technician currently at Bling and also an assistant editor.
Awesome. Thank you guys. Excellent passing. So one thing I wanted to start with, like, I did the show of hands. We all know someone who has dealt with mental health issues, or we've been in a period in our life where we've had to deal with it ourselves. But since we're talking about post specifically, I guess I want to start with Natalie and say, what do you think is different about post-production or unique about post-production rather than, say, accounting or some typical, what you might consider typical 9-to-5 job?
Well, part of it is the hours, I think. We work long hours, and I know that everybody in the industry works long hours. Production works, they have their 12 hours and 14, however long they work. But I think part of the problem post-production is that you're in generally dark rooms, small rooms, loud rooms, hot rooms, cold rooms, just sort of like thrown together rooms if you're on a low budget production and like maybe you're in a lean-to or you're in like, I don't know, I mean like some facilities are amazing and nice, but some just are bare bones, maybe there's a mini fridge. So I think that we're always in environments that are sort of not conducive to your own well-being, and then you have producers who come in and that's a whole nother group of people who have their own things to deal with, and so they sort of take whatever they're dealing with from studios, networks, whoever, and they put it on you. And I feel like assistant editors, and I'm sure editors get it a lot too, but a lot of times like assistant editors will get whatever falls on them, gets it just kind of rolls downhill to the assistants, and I feel like sometimes there's just no boundaries, because we always want to get things done, and there's never like, oh, we can do it tomorrow. It's like, no, it needs to get done now. Like, everything needs to get done now. Budgets are low, time is limited, we just have to do all of these things, and I feel like in other industries, in other professions, that's not exactly the case. Like, you can leave at 4:30 and come back and finish your, accounting work or whatever, your insurance appraisal or whatever else you have to do. But in our line of business, like, can I have it now? Well, you can have it maybe in a day. Well, what about now? Like, no, well, like, I need a day for it. Like, well,
Or if you want it to be good.
fast. Yeah, like faster. Oh, okay. So.
Chris, do you want to take that one too?
I think one of the things that's really interesting about posts is that, in terms of just talking about like the entertainment industry itself, our job is 100% mental all day long. We are having to operate on all cylinders on our brain the entire day. Like, in terms of production, there's a lot of physical aspects to that job. In terms of like the development, there's obviously, it's also a very mental thing too. But a lot of times in development, in the writing room, you have a room, you're working with other people, and you get that collaborative environment, which is awesome. In post, there's that collaborative nature, but it's also this isolated space too. And that's where I think a lot of like the problems or the difficulties people have to face is that if you're in your brain all day, having to think, make 1,000 different decisions, and you're isolated, it can, that can build up and lead to various issues, as we all have experienced.
Okay, I didn't say this earlier, but if you guys have a question or super salient point you want to throw out, keep an eye out for hands, or like Kelly said, you can tweet at us and they'll make their way to me. So I want to be kind of inclusive, not just us talking at you. So the next thing I want to talk about is, so we've established there's obviously issues. It's really easy to work long hours. Your boss or supervisor doesn't always have your best interests at heart, and we can talk about ways to change that a little later on, but in the heat of the moment, you can't enact a industry-wide change when it's 10:30 at night. So I want to talk about, Kira, do you have any strategies or things that you've ever done to, first of all, survive that situation, but improve it for yourself, or anything like that?
Well, sleep is important, even if you can never get it. Yeah. What was the question again specifically?
So when you're in that situation, that's not the time to try and enact some big change for better hours and better mental health. But so how can you protect yourself, maybe from getting in that situation, or once you're there, do you have any ideas or tricks for how to survive it?
I mean, breathe. Yeah, honestly, like, I don't really know. Like, if you can set out expectations ahead of time, that's probably the best way to do it. Like, you can like say, hey, what are the hours going to be? And like, I'm only going to work 5 hours or 5 days a week or whatever. But I don't know if that's entirely realistic with the expectations that are in the industry as a whole, and sort of the fear of like someone else replacing you, if you don't conform to whatever they want.
Just like a strategy that I have is in those like high pressure, the world's falling apart, or you feel like the world's falling apart, or your internal world is falling apart, whatever it might be, just taking a minute and getting out of that headspace, and trying to just find a moment and let it go, and then get back into it. Like, there's an app called Headspace, which is like a meditation app. And one of the things that it has like SOS is like an option for it. And they're like 3-minute long, like it's this British guy who has a really calming voice who basically just talks you off the ledge over 3 minutes. And sometimes I've had to use it sometimes where like I feel like I'm gonna break down and the world's falling apart. Just like go to the bathroom, pop in the headphones, listen to that, and then like move forward. Just finding, and like you don't have to do that. You don't have to have an app. Like if you can go through that process on your own mentally, that's important, it helps, like, just finding the moment to take that time and, like, take care of yourself, really, that's what it's about.
Yeah, one of my go-to tricks is just taking a walk around the block. I've beaten some paths in around the neighborhood around here, but, you know, a lot of times it'll be like a late night, we're delivering that night, and we send something out, we know the client's going to give us notes in 20 minutes, I'm like, look, I'll be back in 15 minutes, I'm just taking a walk, and just put some music on, let the British guys knock you out.
Most
Yeah.
facilities are like full of small, dark, cold rooms, so that's always, if you can finally just go in there, just like, just chill for a second and calm down, and you can sort of have that private area to decompress.
What was the name of the meditation workshop?
It's called Headspace. Yeah, so I think, like, the way it works is that the first, like, 10 sessions or 10 things are free to, like, get you hooked, and then it's like, and then it's like there's a subscription over the course of a year, which I think it's like, for a year it's like maybe $100, but I'm not gonna make this an ad for Headspace, but it's really great, because I could talk to you about it, but I'm not going to.
So Shane, yeah, I wanted to direct that to you if you had any tips or advice or insight.
Well, first of all, I wanted to say, in my own background, I worked in the movie business in development as a development executive, which is totally the opposite end of where you're all working, where it's all schmoozing, it's all who returned your phone call, and everything is about how important are you, who called you back, can you deliver. So you're at this other place, which is really fascinating, and we had a little phone conference call before this, and it sounds like you work in isolation a lot. And there's a lot of pressure to fix things that other people might have screwed up or they don't like enough. And so there's all these outside pressures. And I think the isolation is on the one hand, it's a fundamental human condition, because we are born alone and die alone, and there's isolation and loneliness. On the other hand, we really need other people, and, you know, for healing and connection, and maybe there's something about the isolation, maybe the difference between solitude and isolation, where you can find a calmer place to be when you're working in these situations. But on the thing of depression or anxiety, I was just curious, what comes up most of the time? Is it anxiety, or is it fear, or it seems, I just want to also say, I think all of you are very high functioning. I don't know how you can do this. So let's just start with that. But, yeah, maybe.
I would say it's like a stages, kind of like the 5 stages of grief. Like first it's fear, then it's anxiety, then it's depression. Yeah.
Okay, we can do this.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's because you have to do it right. Because if you don't do it right, it costs someone money, and if it doesn't, and maybe it doesn't actually cost them money, but they'll tell you it costs them money, and they'll tell you that it's not. Like they'll make it seem as if it's a big deal, but I mean that's the other big problem is if you have a producer who makes every little problem a big deal, then every one of those decisions that you make every day that Chris mentioned, every one of those decisions has this weight upon it that you're just like, I can't make any mistakes or else my producer's gonna be so mad at me over this, even if it's like you didn't highlight something yellow that's new or something. Like I've gotten yelled at for that. So it's like we don't know what's new. How do we know it's new? You didn't highlight it yellow, and so you know it's kind of like every little thing is a thing. So
I think that, you know, that stems top down. It's like a lot of times the people at the top are yelling at somebody, and then they're yelling at somebody, and eventually it gets down to you because there's been several layers of yelling or frustration, and it gets taken out. And if you're assistant editor or PA, like you're often the last rung, so it's like everybody else's shit is gonna come down to you. And so I definitely think, to answer your question, Shane, there's a lot of fear, but I think that there's that constant state of like anxiety, especially when you are in a situation where, you know, if you're dealing with a particularly frustrating or overbearing client, like, you know, I've had jobs where it's a pleasure to work on the show because the people are great, and even if it's stressful, like everybody is a team and you feel great about it, and like you're happy, but I've also worked on shows where like the content was great, but like working on it was so unbearably unhappy just because whatever the stresses may be, and whether they coming from top down or whatever. I totally lost my train of thought, but yeah, like I think if you have that I think a lot of the environment plays into it, because if you are with like-minded people who care and have those same values of like, we're in this together as a team. This is not, life or death. This is movies and TV. We're not saving the world. We're making stuff that is fun. Like, when people have that right attitude, it makes everything so much easier. And when people forget that and think it's life or death, and then everybody just, is a jackass, basically.
A sense of self-importance in the industry.
Yeah.
And I know for me personally, like, I don't know if this is other people, like, I don't really notice when I get stressed, but I'll notice that the way I start to perceive the world starts to change. So, like, what might be a really easy job, if I'm in a good mood, suddenly turns into this gigantic, like, oh my god, this thing's never gonna get done, and I'm doing terrible at it, and everyone's mad at me, or that kind of thing. And so, like, just being aware of how that necessarily the way, like, as you're perceiving the current situation isn't necessarily always accurate, or at least beneficial to you.
I did want to throw that back to you, Shane, just from a general, mental wellness perspective. How can you keep an eye on yourself, or how can you be open to or aware of, or notice warning signs that you may be burning out or be stressed out?
Well, that's a big question. Okay. Well, I think on the one hand, we have this concept of an internal locus of evaluation versus an external locus of evaluation. In other words, not all of your value comes from what other people think of you, and kind of getting back to yourself. And I think all of you had to go through so much to get to this point. I mean, starting with preschool and all the tests and everything in life, and then you land here and somebody's yelling at you in this little room that's almost falling apart. Kind of remind yourself of who you are and get back to your own essence, your sense of humor, whatever is you. And they don't determine your value. And it's hard to step back and realize that. But I think one thing, like in the 12-step programs, there's the idea of the higher power. But one thing I like about that, and I've been accused of being agnostic like Bernie Sanders, so please, be patient. But no, actually, I think that don't make them into gods, is what I'm saying. These people are just people. They're a producer, they're a director, they're whatever, whoever you're reporting to. They're not idols. And so, they can yell or scream and maybe just have your distance or your boundaries there. And step back and remind yourself of what matters to you, whether it's loved ones or that you're hungry, or and I think it's just about your own authenticity, or like who you are. And it's not the last job in the world either. So I don't know if you also
I think you can really, like, in the heat of the moment, like, sort of lose your perspective on how the project's going, like where you are. Like, if there's a crisis on one day, you feel like the project is going to shreds, and like, it's this huge catastrophe, but really, I mean, in the course of a feature, you're going to be working on it for like 3 to 6 months, and like, is this one day really that important in the grand scheme of things?
Yeah, I used to do finishing work for music videos, and it would never cease to amaze me how we could work all night, oh my god, the deadline is tomorrow. There's these contracts you always hear about, like, if we don't deliver by this date, X amount of money, so there's all this stuff online. But then I'll go home and I'll come in the next day and it's like, you know what, we actually want this one change. And all of a sudden it's like, where did the deadline go? Where did anything go? And so it makes you check yourself. I also want to point out, Katie in our live chat just now pointed out that a great app for taking a break is Pokemon Go. Just catch a couple Pokemon and take a walk, and you're good on that. One of the things I want to point out too is during those crazy deadlines, there's, I think, just to time time with psychology a little bit, I've noticed in myself, there's sort of a fight or flight, like response when you're asked to work late or when you're under the gun. It's sort of like, I know in a split second I can go all the way from, I can do this to, why am I working in post? You know what I mean? All the way down. From why am I working here? Do I even like what I'm doing? Boom, why am I here? I could be asleep, just this whole thing. Have you guys experienced that? Do you have any?
Yes,
any stories you can
absolutely,
share?
absolutely all the time.
How do you get through that?
Again, I think it's just good to, like, if you can catch yourself and realize that that's what's happening. Because like so often I think we just like believe whatever we're thinking, and not just realize that, oh, wait a second, like I'm just stressed, and maybe joining post was actually a good decision after all, and maybe everything's going to be okay. So yeah, I definitely think that's an issue. If you can manage to do it, like it's sometimes hard to remember to like take that step back and figure out what's going on, which is probably why taking breaks and walking around, and not just sitting at your desk and working for 12 hours straight is beneficial.
Yeah, I'm just always prepared to be there late, even if I haven't done anything until 5 p.m. and then all of a sudden something comes in and it's urgent, you gotta stay till 10.
Doesn't matter when you came in, right?
No, it doesn't, and I say, hey, I go on OT at this point, you wanna pay for it? Okay, then I'm here. So I just am always kind of prepared until 7, 8 o'clock whenever I usually leave, until that time comes. I stop making plans on the weekdays, or I at least, like I told someone earlier during the half-hour mingling that if I make plans on the weekdays, I tell the people, oh, well, there's about a 70% chance I'm gonna cancel. So I'm just always, because I would get to that point where I'm really excited to go home, I've got these plans, I'm gonna go to dinner with friends, these are gonna be awesome, and then 7 o'clock, we need this tonight. And I go through that whole thing, like, why am I here, why did I do this, what's wrong with me, why did this happen, why me? And so, to avoid that, I just realized that could literally happen at any, I'm just sort of like, this could just happen. Instead of it being a surprise, it's always, this could happen.
It's helpful for your friends to be in the industry too, or to educate your friends who aren't in the industry about like sort of how it works. Because I know like my family, it took forever for them to like get the concept of, what do you mean you don't know what time you go into work tomorrow? And so like the more you can get other people used to that, or they know that, I think it's easier to like make plans but be much more flexible on them.
Now, like related to that is that having those open conversations with like significant others, especially if you live with them, like, that's really good question.
Yeah, I mean, it just.
Yeah.
What about work-life balance though? That's the thing, everybody's talking about working long hours, but then here's the other issue is I find that there's a lot of single people working in post-production. So you work long hours and you come home and you're by yourself. So you can't just constantly say, I'm gonna work 12-hour shift, 14-hour shifts. Then you don't have like that work-life balance, and I think that that's a major issue that, needs to be balanced somehow. And then again, that falls into the entertainment industry and like what they do to us, you know what I mean? So, I don't know, so I just kind of want to put that out there.
No, that's a good point. I was gonna, like, what you were saying, Natalie, is that's a good way to handle it in the moment, but ultimately that's not healthy.
No.
If you're always shutting yourself down, I was excited to go out tonight, darn, that's good once or twice a month or something, but to have to be a regular way of life is definitely not healthy.
No, yes. So I just finished reading, or I'm almost done listening to Anne Marie Slaughter's Unfinished Business, and in it she describes sort of, it's a lot of work-life balance type of stuff. And in it there's a whole excerpt or a whole chapter on these sort of tours of duty, right? Like tours of duty work, which is kind of what we do. We have these big projects, they gotta get done, you're there, like, you'll put in the time to get it done. But then when you have your off time, like, that's when you take advantage of your off time. Like I know sometimes the off time doesn't come, but in that moment you sort of have to think, well, the off time needs to come, and I need to not work this weekend, or I need to maybe at that point it's time to have a conversation with your producer and say, look, I understand like so like, I understand that we have to get all this stuff done right now, and this project is very important, but when this is done, I'm gonna need a weekend, or can I have a day to sort of make up for all this overtime? Like, I'm gonna need some time to come back and be refreshed, and hopefully they're amenable to something like that.
Do you get pushback in that case when you've done that?
I mean, it depends, it depends on the producer. I mean, luckily, like, the editor that I work with is very understanding of that sort of thing. But it depends on the producer, and sometimes, at certain jobs, like, we try, at least me and the editor I work with, we try to, like, make an environment of sort of camaraderie, like, we'll have 5 p.m. happy hour, or 5 p.m. wine hour, or whatever, and try to, like, build in some of this time of, like, we're all in this together, like, we're bonding, but, yeah, occasionally but sometimes I can tell, like, can I just come in late tomorrow, like, can I please just take some time, and there's some shows that they just sort of understand, like, you're working all the time, like, just come in late, like, we don't care. And it's unfortunate when there's some shows that aren't like that, and then maybe it's time to evaluate whether or not you need to move to a new show, if they're not amenable to it, because there are other jobs, there are other employers, there's not only one gig in town, and so if you find yourself in that position, then maybe try to find somewhere else to go.
Another thing that came up in our discussion was the question of, are you replaceable? And I think that was a great question that you asked, because where does it end? It's like an infinite amount of self-sacrifice. There has to be an end, a point where you say this is too much, or it's enough. And so a lot of people expressed this feeling that there was this culture of you can be replaced. And that's, first of all, it's really nasty. I think it's great that you're raising consciousness here, hopefully among all layers of the industry about this. But also just psychologically, I think everyone has this fear of being replaceable or not lovable, or the child, when like a 3-year-old plays peekaboo and how excited they are to realize that they're still there, or you're still there, even if they can't see you. And that thing of, you do matter regardless of whether your employer is, patting you on the back, or so at that point where it's time to go home, I think actually sometimes you'll be more respected if you say, okay, I have these boundaries, and then if they have an emergency, okay, then maybe they'll appreciate it. But to constantly be that self-sacrificing, I don't know, is it really like that you have to just roll over?
Yes,
or
yes,
go
it's
to-
Depends on the job.
Yeah, it's gonna depend on who you're working for a lot. In my current job, I'm like blessed to be working with a ton of people who get it, and like they try very, very hard to give you, like, not overwork you and understand that kind of thing. And if you're sick, okay, we're not gonna replace you. Humans are human. But I don't necessarily know if that's always the case. It also depends where you are in the industry. If you're very new to the industry, you're gonna have a lot harder time, like, going up to the post producer and being like, I'm not working, I refuse to work this Saturday, or I need to go home and take care of myself. Versus if you've been working a bit more and a bit more confident in your ability to get other jobs, then you might be a bit more assertive. Yeah.
I think sometimes, you really have to feel out the situation. Like, in order for sometimes for one of those pushbacks to be well received, you have to, like, do it in the right moment. You can't, like if everything's happening that second, you're like, yeah, like, I'm not gonna do that, or whatever. It's not gonna go over well. And you might.
Yeah, you can't be the brick wall.
Yeah.
It probably helps
There's-
to
it's-
give some forewarning.
Yeah, and if you know of things, like, especially, like, if there are big things coming up in your life, and, like, you have a crazy post schedule, but you're able to tell, like, your employers, like, hey, like, my brother's wedding is, this month, it's 2 months out, I know that's gonna be a really hectic time, but, like, this is really important to me and my family, like, let's plan for that, instead of, like, doing it the week of, like, hey, I got my brother's wedding this weekend, or whatever.
Yeah, people are way more happy the further they know in advance of changes to the status quo. It's probably, like, also important to make your argument, even though you shouldn't have to. Like, if you're burnt out, your work is gonna suffer and you're gonna make mistakes, and I mean, if you're conforming a show, that's not a good place to be in. You don't want to be making mistakes. And I think if you can sort of approach it from that angle, and say, hey, like, I can stay working, but there might be shots missing or the wrong versions of something, they might be more able to understand.
And it's also good when those last minute requests come in to just say, you know, is it possible for me to come in tomorrow and do this? Like, do you realistically, like, what is your drop dead deadline? Is this something that you're gonna get charged for? Are you doing a drop-in session at 9 a.m.? No, my drop-in session's not till 1 p.m. Okay, can I do this in the morning then? You know, that sort of thing is good to sort of like talk to your producers or supervisors with and say, okay, how is this actually a priority? Do you really need this now? Not like that, because that's, you know, do you really need this? But, you know, just talk them through what they might actually be
And you
needing.
come at it with the attitude of not, man, I'm trying to get out of work, or man, I'd like to go home. It's, I can do a better job tomorrow
So,
with
yeah,
fresh eyes.
I really want to do
Exactly.
this.
Yeah, you can
And
say,
I want
like,
to do it like, yeah, it's like, hey, I want to do the best I can on this, and I need to take care of myself and get some rest so I can make sure I do it right.
It's like pitching it so that you're helping them. It's not that you're helping yourself, it's like, oh, if you want it to be perfect, if you want it to be as good as you want it to be, like the show to be good, I need to do this. And if this is like going home getting some sleep because you've been there for 16 hours, then that's something that, like, if you pitch it in the right way, like, people will be more receptive. Like, should they just inherently be cool with it? Yeah. But like, it's not that simple.
Yeah, I mean, it's worth noting that there are people in the industry that won't, like, accept any argument. They're gonna be like, no, work. And I think only the best thing you can do at that point is, like, get through it and then try really hard never to work for that person again. Which, again, as you, like, stay in the industry longer, it gets easier and easier to avoid people who are abusive or toxic to work for.
Can I just ask a question? I think you've hit on a really interesting subject. You said something about being authentic, and then I'm hearing this other conversation about really choosing your language very carefully when you have to negotiate something. And I find I've spent a lot of time over the years sort of twisting myself in knots to try and get the exact wording right that isn't going to piss somebody off. But you know, I'm an editor, so I'm dealing with producers and directors, and sometimes we get into some serious conflict. And just finding the exact right way of, you know, not coming on too strong. And then I've got a foreign accent, so I think people hear things in my voice that aren't necessarily there. So it's been a confusing thing for me, like being authentic versus diplomacy and making sure that, you know, I say the exact right words that are going to open the door to.
I do a lot of my controversial stuff in emails, like or at least like, hey, can I talk to you about this situation, which gives you a chance to sort of edit yourself.
Right, but I find emails are often misconstrued because people don't hear the tone in your voice
That's
in an email. So that's a tricky thing too. Like I spent from midnight last night till 3 o'clock this morning composing an email to a producer who I'm having a battle with about payments and deadlines and things. So it's I find that really tricky waters to navigate, and I'd love to hear your opinion, the therapist's opinion.
Well, one thing I tell my individual clients is don't confess to Stalin. That's just the sixth thing I say. You know, just know who you're talking to. Don't tell them. You don't have to tell your producer your innermost thoughts and feelings.
Right.
You can tell that to your friend or your therapist. So there is a certain amount of, you're not fully there to be yourself with someone that you don't trust that much. You don't have to be. So that's one part. Then I think there's, you know, you have your own needs, and then there's something like we call a super ego, which is the should part of you. I should work all night. And then there's like healthy ego strength. So maybe to determine, you know, what are your real needs and how can you negotiate what you need with what they need, and, you know, step back. You don't have to express every feeling that you have to these people, you know. So I think there's a certain amount of, you know, I guess diplomacy that you might want to have. But one thing that I was going to ask everybody in the room and the panel is Christia, you said that you use all these parts of your brain and your senses, and so it's an interesting paradox that you guys are so incredibly skilled, and yet you describe the position as a very servile position. So I just wanted to hear, like feedback on that.
That's so deep. I mean, in a way, yeah, editors and assistant editors and like the whole post team are there to help get the main product to what it should be. Which is like, you could say that about anybody in the industry. Like, if you're on a project, it's all about serving the final project and like, I don't know, sacrificing something of yourself in order to get it there. But I think, one of the particular things about post is that, we are the last step, so a lot of people's expectations come down on us. It's like, well, we didn't shoot that right, but we really want it to look like this, so what can you do to make that look like this? And it's...
You can make it night, right?
We shot this during the day, can you make it look like night? Whatever. So, I think it's, we're dealing with a lot of people's expectations all the time. Like, and it's like, you're our only hope to make it happen. Like, that's where I think one of the big things about post is like, everything else has happened, this is our last chance at making what we wanted to set out happen. So, that's where a lot of the pressure is. It's like, we can make magic, but like, are we given enough time? Are we given enough, resources in order to make that happen? And often the answer is no. And we have to deal with that. And that's where a lot of the creativity comes in, like, whether that be coming up with a creative edit, or like doing a conform on a really complex online, like, there's a lot of creativity that we are constantly being asked to do in post.
The triangle, you get 3.
Yeah.
Yeah, choose one, you get cheap, quick, good. You get 2. Yeah, there's 3 things, you get 2 of them. And so I think that, temporary producer and director's expectations when you actually get into the edit room is important, so that they don't feel so let down by what has happened before then. And so that is sort of where we end up we end up having to be the ones to say, well, that was a great idea. This is what we can do with what you have, and I'll try to make it work as best I can. And sometimes you'll get someone who's like, this is great, you did a great job, and sometimes you'll get someone who thinks maybe someone else can do it better, and like, that is probably on them. That's probably on them to think that, so.
Industry-wide, in the film industry, I don't know if it's like this other ways, but I feel like even from the moment I was in film school, you're sort of like groomed to be everyone's servant. And that might be an industry, like a thing that needs to change, because, if you're in that position, it's gonna be a lot harder for you to defend yourself. And so I think that is an interesting thing about the film industry in general. And once it gets to post, it's even more so, because you're like you said, you're at the end of the line, and there's so many expectations coming down on you, and you're not dealing with anyone else but like the really, really high heads of the production, which there's ego problems in the industry too. And so I think that's like an industry-wide change that probably should be forced to slowly happen, because it's not necessarily the most helpful thing to be in that position. Like when someone says jump, you ask how far, and I don't think that's exactly what it should be.
It also just comes down to a matter of feeling respected by your superiors or producers, directors, higher ups. It's just a matter of thinking that what you bring to the table is respected and appreciated. And so when you don't feel that way, like you sort of internalize it and think, what's wrong with me? Why am I doing this? And a lot of times if they're not appreciating the work that you're doing, like that's their problem. That's not your problem. And so generally, we're all working very hard to make a product succeed, and that's what we're all there for. And so when that does happen to somebody, like, it's easy, it's much better mindset to be in, to just say, no, this is not me, this is something that, because we're all, like, creatives have sort of, like, they're sort of unpredictable, like, you don't know what they're gonna, like, go off the handle on, or throw a pen at a monitor or something and break it, whatever. So, you know, they've got their issues too, and it's not always you.
Okay, so I'm gonna be devil's advocate on this idea that everyone in the industry is passive. I went to NYU Film School and then I worked in development, and it was really kind of the opposite. We had to be really aggressive, almost too aggressive.
In New York too, right?
Huh? It started in New York, but yeah, but worked in LA, and there was a sort of you you started with nothing. So you're in the opposite end. You have material.
But
So-
in the development area, you're also like sort of the higher end of that I was talking about. You're the producers and the writers and the above the line people who are these sort of ones that everyone else is serving.
Well, it's called above the line, but you know, like a development executive, a VP of development, which is what I did. No, we reported to our bosses who were really devastated if a star turned them down, and then they trash us. And one of my bosses told me that I should attack my assistant because I was criticizing him. I said, "You let this project fall apart." He said, "I gave you an assistant so you could beat her up, not me," and stuff like that. So.
So it's everywhere.
It's everywhere, yeah, and it's
We're
aggressive.
not alone.
No, and I think, on the one hand, some people might think you're lucky because writers start with nothing. And so they have that issue, like, there's nothing, now what am I gonna do? And trying to pull something off or pitch it with 2 lines to get people to buy it. By the time you get it, something's happened. You've got material, I don't know, it seems like is there some,
Yeah, sometimes it's good, sometimes it's not so good. And the problem comes when it's not so good, and that's what Chris was like, if your producer is expecting it to be good, and then it's not so good, and then it's on you to fix it.
Well, and you know, just because something's there doesn't make it, you know, a lot of times there's the whole phrase like polishing a turd. Like that's like a lot of what post can be. It's like the concept wasn't fully visualized, you know, when they started. They didn't shoot it properly when that poor concept, and then somebody's expecting post team to turn it into gold. It's like that's just not possible. And having to you know, temper those expectations, and like some people get it, and you can say like, look, what you did is not possible. Like you're asking me to do something where like you didn't shoot that angle. We are never going to get it unless you go back and shoot it, or whatever it might be. And some people are receptive to that, some people are not. And at a certain point, you have to step away from it and be like, this is not a reflection of me. And this is something that I actually really struggle with, is like, when a project doesn't go the way you want, that's not necessarily your fault. I mean, it can be from a technical or a creative standpoint, but like, if the script wasn't great, the production didn't do it, or something, and it's not living up to the expectations originally that were there, you might never be able to make that an edit that'll make that look good or be good. And that's something that I struggle with, where like, you know, if I was just better, I can make this thing good, you know? And sometimes that's not true, and having the wherewithal to step back and like, look, this is not me. This was a doomed project, or this was a flawed project, and I'm never gonna be able to get it to where my client or director or whoever wants it. And being able to like actually like forgive yourself for failing, even though it's not really failing at that point. It's like, it's just reality that you can't do what is impossible.
And it's, at some point, it comes with experience too. It's just having the confidence to just say, I've done what I can. I've worked my butt off on this project to give you everything that I could do with it, and this is what it is.
So while we often also, you know, we talk about how we work kind of isolated a lot of times, especially for sort of color or finishing, you might be with a client, but you're sort of your own team. But you still have some kind of support around you. You have your supervisor, you might have assistants or coworkers. How do you think we can be better about helping each other out on our level? So if we can't necessarily force change above the line, how can we look out for our fellow coworkers? How can we notice, hey, someone might not be doing so well? How do you recognize burnout? I'm going to open that up to you guys.
Before my current gig, I was an online editor at a post facility, and I did a lot of like reality TV and award shows and stuff like that. And so something that was important to me was that when dealing with my assistant editors, I would wanted to go up, talk to them, like, and not just like call them from my room. I want to go interact with them and spend time with them and joke with them, because not only is that good for them, it was great for me, like to be able to get out of my bay where I feel like I'm an island. I'm this solo person, but like actually like go interact with people, being collaborative, and like that boosts the morale. Like when you're able to like joke around with the people you work with and have fun, that's really important. And physically, the action of just getting up and going down the hall, if it's just like, hey, I need this thing, can you export it? I can put this in a bin, can you export that and send it to the client or whatever? I could call and do that, but the fact that I walk down the hall and or email or Slack, whatever. But the fact, going and like having that personal interaction, in-person interaction, is so important. And it breaks up the monotony of the day too. It's like, but at the same time, going and seeing that, like you can physically see if people are like out of sorts. Like, there were times when I go in and like, there's a bad mood in the assist bay. Okay, what's going on? Can we address it, etc. Like, part of it's like, you might not always be able to be aware of like how you feel, like sometimes because you're in your own headspace, but sometimes you having the wherewithal to see where other people are and seeing how they're doing, like that's a lot easier a lot of the times.
Yeah, I was just going to say, when I hear you, when you're confident about your work, I find it really impressive, and I think it's important to be aware that you do something they can't do. That's why they hired you. And not to get all, freaked out and insecure about it, but maybe to have a certain kind of confidence. I think that makes them feel better too. And so when you say, okay, I do know what I'm doing, and here's how I see it, I think that's impressive. And I think just reminding yourself of what you're good at and your skills, and can help you to feel better about yourself and protect you maybe from the onslaught of the self-esteem crush or whatever it
Like, and this is, I don't necessarily answer this, but all of us post people up here are at some level of authority. But I think what's interesting is like, how do you give that advice to someone who's just starting out, who's a post PA, who's like, I don't know what I'm good at yet, or like I don't feel confident. Like, how do you what do we do for those people who don't have the confidence, who are just starting out? Like, how do you imbue them with any of these things?
I don't know if anybody's got ideas.
Well, by telling them it's okay not to know. Because I was just talking to somebody who had emailed and said, how do I get into scripted television, and I don't know if I'm doing all the right things, blah, blah, blah. And I just said, look, you're reaching out to people, you're talking to them, you're trying your hardest, you're putting yourself in a position to be hired as the thing you want to be. So just keep doing that, and that's okay to not feel like, if you're 22 or even if you're 32 and you're a post PA and you're just starting out in post and you don't know exactly what you're good at yet, like, you're not supposed to yet. That's why that's why you take on other projects with, take on a short, or take on, usually a short is, like with maybe a friend who you feel comfortable working with or something like that, so that you can start to build up those chops and you can start to say like, oh, I'm really good at cutting montages, or I'm really good at dealing with music and cutting music, like that's something that I'm good at. So then you can start to feel more confident in your work and to continue to do these things, and then you can be in the edit bay with a higher level producer director. Maybe the friend you worked with is now a higher level producer director, and you work together and you say, look, these are the skills that I've learned. And you just acquire as many skills as you can, and through that you'll keep learning and you'll get more confident.
I think for a lot of people, mental health and burning out, and not just in post, but I know from my experience in post as well, the topic is touchy, and it is very hard sometimes for people to even want to admit themselves that they might be burnt out, much less to their coworkers or even their family and friends. They want to put on a good face. So I want to put the question to you guys. Say that one of you was experiencing this. How would you like to be approached what do you think is the best way? I can't come up to you and say, are you stressed out? Yeah, I can say it, but in the mental health sense, how can you reach out to someone, or how would you like to be reached out to cross that bridge?
Yeah, I actually had this happen to me recently. So I've been jumping from a lot of different jobs, and like various things that happened along the way that had just a lot of buildup of like the disrespect and the just feeling either not totally confident in my job. Basically, I was just worn out. And so by the time I got to another job that I was at, I was in a very not good headspace. I was in a space where I was very negative. I was very just kind of, however I was like speaking or doing, I was like a little bit confrontational. I was very negative. And like part of me was like, I want to be respected. To do this, like I'm not going to be super nice. I'm not going to do, so I was very like, I was a little bit more abrasive than I usually am. And so I had a producer talk to me and be like, we worked together before. That's why you're here. What's going on? Like there's something going on. And we need to talk about it. And what's great is that she came in and wanted to talk to me and figure it out. And I was very upset because I didn't want to like lose my job or something. And so it was very emotional for me to go through something like that. But in the end, it ended up being very helpful. So I think
so
that can
more
only.
of a direct approach where they just.
Yeah, she's like very direct, but like that might just be me. But I think it's helpful when it's somebody that you know and trust. So because I had worked so closely with this producer before, and because I trusted her, she was able to come in and say, look, I just need to know what's going on. And so, it was like a light switch for me, because I didn't even know it at that point. So it was I was just like, yep, you're right, you're absolutely right, and I'm gonna stop. And it was. And so I think what needs to happen is you need to have that relationship with somebody, and you need to come from a place of like care, and that you're not there to just like berate someone and be like, something's wrong with you. It's a place of like trust and care and just well-being for the person, and maybe they're not in a place to hear it, and like maybe they're, it'll be a little bit of a fight. Like hopefully it won't be, but it always has to come from a place, and I think it's hard to do that to a person that you've only been working with for a month.
Mm-hmm.
But if you've been working with them for a long time and you know them and you trust them, then, just, hey, it feels like something's going on. Is something going on? So.
I mean,
Yeah, I was gonna say sort of the same thing. It's like it's gonna depend on like what your relationship is too. Like if you're coming from a place of authority, you're gonna need to approach it in a much more sort of like I don't want to say comforting, but like, hey, I'm not gonna fire you, but I've noticed that that you're not acting the way you usually do, and like what can we do to help? Versus if you're like you're a coworker with someone, it's probably a lot easier to go up to them straight, directly, and be like, and come from that place of comfort to say, like, look, you're not doing well, or you seem really, really stressed. Like, what can I do to help you?
I think it's about making it about the person. It's not about the job at that point. It's not about how they're doing the job. The task is like coming at it from a point like I care about you as who you are, and something seems off. Something seems like you as a person are not happy. At this point we're not caring about. I've had this happen to me, and I reached out to friends that I saw going through it, and it's that's when it comes about like I care about you, not the job, not the place we're working at, and it's all about you as a person, and are you okay? Because if you're not okay, that's what really matters. Like, at the end of the day, you can have any other job, you can work anywhere else, but if you as a person are depressed or unhappy or dealing with severe anxiety, like that's what matters.
And I think coming back to what Chris said about the camaraderie, and we like touched on it briefly. I think if you lead up to that, like leading up to being able to approach someone who's in trouble, like establishing that camaraderie within the office, and knowing that like I work with there's 3 of us who are the assistant editors, and there's a certain amount of jobs that need to get done, but someone had to leave for a funeral suddenly, but we covered for that person, and then I actually had a bad accident, so I had to leave for a week, and they covered for me. And so it's one of those things where you it's really good to establish a working environment where you know that like someone has your back and someone will be there for you. So I think like leading up to being able to talk to someone is to make sure you have that rapport with your coworkers, that if something bad happens, if you really need us to be there, we'll be there, we'll get it done. Like, you don't have to worry about the job will get done, you take care of you.
I think it's important to tease out what your anxiety is actually about, and sometimes it can become this anxiety soup. You know, like you didn't pay the rent, or those are concrete things that need to be dealt with. Sometimes the anxiety is informing you that you need to do something, and it's meaningful. Then there's anxiety, will I disappoint my boss, or maybe you're worried about your relationship. So you can have 20 things going on at once, and then everything is magnified, and it's just so overwhelming. So I think that's one thing that therapy is good for, or a friend who will listen, where you actually kind of separate out the different layers of anxiety and cope with them one thing at a time. You know, okay, this is really bothering me, it's really threatening, I need to deal with it. You know, say your health after an accident, that's central. Or you have a family member who, so I just think looking at anxiety, like we have something called generalized anxiety disorder, and it's really just, you know, worrying about everything, and when you solve one problem, you're worrying about something else. So that's just one thought.
Yeah, I was also going to say that, like, I think it's as important as to take care of yourself, it's also really important to be looking out for the people that you work with, because I think it's an American thing, and especially a film industry thing, like the pressure on yourself that you put on yourself because of this like cultural idea of like, oh, I need to keep working even if I'm sick, even if I'm tired. Like if I'm not like working as hard as I can unless I'm dead, I'm not working as hard as I can, and I'm lazy. And I think the only way it's a lot easier for someone to come to you and say, hey, you're working too hard, than to admit to yourself you're working too hard.
I wanted to take that a step further. We had a question online, like, what can you do? And I'd like you to sort of take this one, Shane. Is there's a point, and it's different for everyone, obviously, where you may not be able to, you know, self-help only goes so far, or talking to a coworker only goes so far. What is the next step, you know, to talk to a therapist, or to take that next step to actively deal with it? Because you can't always deal with it on your own, and you don't have to. And I just wanted you to talk to that.
Yeah, really, that's what therapy's for. And so looking for a therapist, that was the question, one question. You can go on Psychology Today and just put in your zip code, look at all the profiles and the faces. You can decide whether that person speaks to you. And a lot of people do free half-hour consultations, so you could go in and check in with that person and see if you have a rapport and if they can help you. So there's goodtherapy.com, there's Psychology Today, and if any of you wanted to come to me, either to work with me, or I could help you find someone in your neighborhood or area, because I know a lot of therapists, to find the right fit for yourself. And then sometimes...
How do you know when you get to the point where you should do that? I think
Well,
a lot of people, your instinct is, therapy is for people who can't, you know, take care of
Handle
themselves,
things,
and I can handle it. And so, what would you say to that? Like, what's a good?
What's a good point where you know
Yeah.
you need help?
Yeah.
Where you're not yourself, maybe you're more irritable, or you feel like you're losing it, and everyone needs to ask for help. And sometimes you might even need medication. So psychiatrists, I don't know if everyone knows the way things are these days, but the psychiatrists prescribe, and the talk therapists meet with you for 50 minutes or an hour, weekly generally, or sometimes every other week. And sometimes the psychiatrist and the therapist then consult. So if someone does need medication, if you have some bipolar traits or worries, maybe you do need medication, or maybe you don't. But so ongoing work with someone. I think most people know when they're in distress. I don't think it's a big secret. I think people know.
I think
Would it be
it's
better
a-
to get
I
there
mean-
before you're in distress though?
Yeah, that's what I was gonna
Yeah.
say, it's like, I mean, you really don't want to know you need help. Cause I mean, if you're in a place where you're like, I need help, that's, you, like, lots of bad stuff has happened, you have a long road ahead of you. So even if you think you might be able to benefit, that's probably the time you wanna start doing it. Cause it's a lot easier to avoid crashing than recovering from severe depression or from what else, those things can lead to.
Yeah, well, it's an individual decision, and some people come in when they're feeling bad, when they're feeling great. I have to say, my clients are more high functioning than most of my friends on some level, but you know, they're self-aware, and sometimes it's because you just think you might want to change, or it's not always because you've just, you
Yeah,
know,
totally. It's
burnt out
Or
or
if you just want
crashed.
some insight, you know,
Right,
objective,
exactly.
third party.
Yeah, it's probably better,
That's fine.
honestly, to be going to therapy when you're in a good place, so you can keep making positive, like, changes in your life and be moving forward to a sort of preventative care, basically.
I also think with what you all do, which you've kind of described as a kind of solitary confinement, you need to talk, you know, actually speak and have conversations. And so to come to someone where you can talk for an hour and be heard, you know, might be very healing in and of itself.
What would you say to somebody though who thinks they need therapy, wants therapy, but then still doesn't feel confident in like getting a therapist? Like, what would you say to something like that?
Well, first I would ask them why, what's going on, why the reluctance, and then just talk about it. I don't know, do you
Like,
think?
it's, you're not in the room with them. Like, it's someone watching this right now. And like, they know that they wanna go, but they're lacking the confidence in order to. Like, what would you say to
Yeah,
that
they're
person?
scared
I
about talking
think
about
that-
their, like, inner thoughts to a complete stranger.
I think the fears of being judged, that they're gonna come in and someone's going to judge them. And there might be, I'm sure there are therapists who might do that, but that's not the kind of person that one would seek out. So if you look at pictures, my first supervisor said, just look at everyone's faces on Psychology Today. Some of them look like they're saying, I'm gonna fix you. Don't go to that person. Yeah, so just, I think, I don't know, maybe that one, that step to just actually going in and
Yeah,
talking.
it takes a lot of courage, especially if you've never been to therapy before and you don't know anything about it. I know, like, sort of my background and my family is very sort of anti-therapy. They think it's like mind control or if you're, therapy's only for really, really broken people. And so I think it can be hard to put all that aside and say, no, like, this is like scientifically based and this is something that I think could help me.
I think we're all broken in some way. I mean, not to sound like super, like we're all, but nobody's actually normal. I think we've already dispelled that. Like,
Well, that's,
none of us
very
are.
fair.
Yeah, like none of
Normal's
us.
no.
Yeah, like if our parents want to continue to think that like there's normal out there, like there's not normal out there. None of us are normal, especially us. We're doing this for ourselves. So if we just all think like no one's normal, like you don't feel normal, no one else feels normal. So
Right.
yeah, so it's just
That's
it's
exactly.
Just,
I brought this as a visual aid. This is our diagnostic statistical manual, and it has like every trait and disorder that one would ever dream of. And I think we can all find ourselves in this book somewhere, like you said. And also, it's if you're going to read any of it, just read the introduction because it's really wild. Because it's basically a long disclaimer. And these are just the collected traits about, perceived disorders, but what really matters is the actual experience of being with a therapist or a friend or whatever support you can find and feeling better about yourself and expressing yourself. And that some people do want a diagnosis, it makes them feel safer. I had a client recently when, after a long period of time, I suggested that maybe he did have traits of bipolar 2 disorder. He was so happy. He said, God, I wanted to know what was wrong. And then the psychiatrist was able to give him something, and so he was just so relieved. Other people might feel pathologized, but what I do is just ask, do you want a diagnosis? You don't have to have one. They're really for the insurance companies. You know, so you can bill, but so yeah, I agree with you. We're all, and we even call ourselves sometimes the wounded healer, you know, because we're all wounded, and that's how we are able to relate and care about each other.
Yeah, and I think it's just good to know that we're all that none of us are actually alone in any of this. It's easier to think like it's not just you, like it's not just me who has a problem, like maybe there's something wrong with me. Like I found it when I feel like this sort of discussion's been, or like when the post community started sort of talking about this a little bit more and like doing things like this, it's comforting to know that you're not alone. Like none of us want to feel alone in all of this, and so it's nice that like we're all struggling. We're all struggling.
And how do you guys think, because tell me if you think I'm right in saying this, but I think that there is still a bit of a stigma about admitting maybe that you go to therapy or that you have gone in the past or any of that. If you think that's the case, how can we change that? Or how can we improve that?
I mean, I definitely think there's a stigma, if not in society, in lots of people's own minds, like of themselves. Because I mean, I know lots of people. I forgot there's the term for it, but it's sort of like the idea that oh, it's completely fine if like they go to therapy, but I don't need it.
It's not judgmental, but
yeah, it's judgmental, but you convince yourself it's not. And I think it's also going to depend a lot on like where you grew up and your family's socioeconomic status, and because I think people in New York probably have a very different view of therapy than people in Montana. And so I don't know exactly how you combat that other than just like the more people talk about it and talk about their own experiences and realize like, hey, like therapy isn't just for crazy people. It's a thing that everyone, like normal people, use.
I'm actually a little surprised that you all feel that there's a stigma. Maybe it does have to do with one's cultural background. I mean, I grew up Jewish, and I think if you didn't have a therapist, there was something wrong with you. But if maybe your family examining like what is triggered for you, you know, about that in your family history or your own cultural background, and just get in touch with that. Do you think actors have the same attitude about therapy being weird, or do you think it's kind of?
I mean, I think it's probably going to depend on the person.
Just generally, okay.
Like I'm sure there are actors who think that therapy is not for them and is like this weird. And there's probably other actors who like have gone there since they were 3, so it depends.
I think there's a lot of pressure, particularly in post, but in all filmmaking, to be very highly functioning. I think people, you know, it's a creative world, but we also have to be very highly functioning in that world. And so I don't know that people want to share openly that they need to have therapy, because that may indicate that you're not functioning as well as you appear to be, or that you need to be, or
Yeah, exactly.
Or that it just invites scrutiny upon you.
yeah, it's like, well, maybe she's a little unbalanced, or something. I don't know. You know.
I have a question for you specifically. So a lot of people that work in the industry are freelancers, and they're bouncing around from jobs, and a lot of things that I've heard about from friends who are looking for therapy or looking for medication is insurance. Sometimes they're out of work. Sometimes they're jumping from gig to gig. Sometimes they're living in different cities, and it's very hard to be consistent because a lot of insurance companies won't, like a lot of places will only take a specific kind of insurance and all that kind of thing. So I just wanted to know, like, if you have any strategies for navigating that, because I've seen that consistently with people I've talked to, where they're traveling and they just can't get consistent therapy.
Yeah, I think it depends. Some therapists will take I have cash clients and credit card clients and people on Medi-Cal even with certain kinds of insurance. But I think you want to find someone who will work with you no matter what the situation is. So sometimes people will do a sliding scale or keep a group of slots open that are less expensive. So you can work things out with someone. And so part of it is advocating for yourself and for your situation. And if someone is too put off, people don't love taking insurance really, in spite of what one might think, because the insurance companies give us a really hard time. They return stuff because some little detail was off, and they're constantly looking for reasons to reject claims. But so whatever your situation is, let that person know and see if you can talk about it and work through it. So they might charge you their fee cash for a while, and they might come down if you're unemployed. It really depends on the person.
I mean, I know when my therapist, when I was like a year ago, I didn't have insurance at the time, and while I was seeing her, I was out of work for a while, and I told her that, and like she was willing to like reduce her fee during that time period. Understand, like once I got another job, you go back to the normal rate. I mean, I think most people in mental health are probably nice people who care about people and have empathy. Like I would hope that's the case. And so there's probably a lot of willingness to work something out.
But I want to say, I love to promote my own business, but I want to say there's a 12-step program called Under Earners Anonymous, which is fantastic. And so if you're a freelancer, you go through these ups and downs. It's about 10 years old. It's kind of a newer 12-step program. And you can use that in a way as a support, a form of therapy, with caution, but still people support each other through these ups and downs, and how do you manage your time. That program's all about time management. They even have this idea of what they call time drunkenness, which is just like letting time go and not knowing what happened to it. So there's therapy, there's group therapy, which can be cheaper too. So you could be in a group, and usually the fees are a lot lower than individual.
Lots of groups I mean, it depends on what you're seeking help for, but there are lots of like free or low cost support groups if you're dealing with a specific issue.
I also wanted to open up, are there any other questions out here floating around that we?
I wanted to respond to something earlier.
Okay.
It was brought up earlier, the whole topic of like work-life balance, and something that like I struggle with sometimes is that it's like you just get involved in work and it's like nothing else is happening, and finding those things that you love outside the job, just things about life, hobbies, whatever, those are so important to have, and so that you can fall back on them. Like if you like love cooking, and you know that that's just an inherently like thing that you are gravitating toward and that gives you enjoyment, like find ways to bring that more into your life. Like whether that's you cook in the morning and then take that to work so that you have that thing, and you started your day with that like intrinsic joy that you just get from doing that. That's great. Or if your life is nothing but work and you're dealing with all the stresses of our very stressful industry, like, and you have nothing outside of that, or if like your idea of fun is just to take on more side projects that are basically just work, like you're gonna kill yourself by just that. So you need other things, whether that be friends or going to movies that you love, like at the New Beverly, or like whatever it might be, like just finding things that you love that have nothing to do with work.
Yeah,
it's
Yeah, I did that. I did something like that about a year ago. I had that issue where I was being defined by work, and that was my whole thing. And every time I tried to go, like my friends, I tried to go out, couldn't. And so I was tired of always being defined as like Natalie Beauchamp, assistant editor, television. So I took up running again, and I decided that I'm gonna train and run for a marathon, and I'm gonna go every other morning or whenever I had to, and I'm gonna just run And now I'm like a year and a half later, and I'm still going, and I'm doing another marathon in October. And there are days when I have to do 13 miles before work. And so I email my producer and I say, can I come in a little bit later? Is it cool if I come in later tomorrow? Because I got this really long run and my commute's 45 minutes to an hour, so is it okay? And they're usually nice about it, and if there's nothing going on, if your producer's like a nice person and understands that you don't have to be there at 9:30 or whenever you have to come in at work if you don't have morning duties, they can be pretty, you know, if you, like, I think we brought this up before, if you bring it up, you know, if I just showed up at 10:30, then, you know, it would be a little bit more, like, what are you doing here so late? Oh, I was running. Were you really? But if I, you know, the day before, 2 days before, I let them know I've got this thing. And I've been at offices where there was a person who was doing this really long charitable bike race, and so every morning he would bike these, like, ridiculous distances, I don't even know, 50, 70 miles, whatever. And he would come into work at 10:30 or 11 o'clock because he had worked something out with his boss, so.
Yeah, I think it's important to prioritize your self-care and like your own like personal happiness just as much as you prioritize your work. So if your attitude towards work normally is like, I need to like work, like unless I'm in a really bad spot, and when you finally have that day or two off, it can be really tempting just to like, you know, sleep for those 2 days and watch TV, and just kind of like zone out. But I think it's important to, when you have that downtime, to be intentional about giving yourself the things you know are going to elevate your mood. So, I mean, if running is your thing that boosts your mood and makes you feel happy, like make sure you do that, even if you don't feel like doing it in the moment.
Well, I think that, you know, it's great to be passive in engagement of things. So like going home and watching Netflix is, we all do it, we love it, it's great, binge shows. But finding ways where you're actively involved in something, that's really, like finding those things. You know, I have 2 dogs, and one of my favorite things in the world to do is to pop in my headphones, go listen to a podcast, and walk around my neighborhood. And we'll go on like 1 mile, 2 mile, 3 mile walks in our neighborhood. And a little bit I'm zoning out because I'm listening to whatever I'm doing, but I'm also like actively engaged in the environment. Or like reading is great because you're actively engaging in something instead of just passively watching something. So I feel like if you are able to actively engage your brain, that helps, you know, bring more life into your life.
Yeah, you stimulate your brain, but in a different way than you're doing it the entire rest of the week. And like, and you're directing it, because I mean, I know when I watch TV, it's very easy to like, the TV's going, but you're just thinking about 10,000 things. And a lot of the stuff we've mentioned is exercise, and I don't think that's a coincidence, because as hard as it can be to get yourself to do it, it really does boost your mood in the time that follows. And so I think that's really important to have some sort of physical activity in your off time to help prevent you from your mood from lowering.
Yeah, that's totally true.
If anyone, some of you are in Fitness in Post, some of you have never heard of it. So fitnessinpost.com, also a Facebook group. We promote a lot of this sort of stuff, exercising on your off time, eating right when you're in the office, easy ways to eat right in the office to sort of keep your brain engaged and like focus, movement throughout the day. Yeah, if you can't exercise, if that's not your thing, you don't want to exercise, you'd rather do something else, just the idea of moving all of the time and making sure that your brain is always like functioning at a higher level than just like, you know, way up here or way down here. Like you're either super stressed out, those like cortisol levels like way too high, or you're just like catatonic. You know, just finding a way to stay in the middle so that when that stressful time does come around, you're ready to do it, and you're ready to do it because you've like kept your brain active all day, like at a functioning level. You haven't kept your brain like up here to where you fall down here and then you need that 5-hour energy or that coffee boost or whatever. Like if you're eating right throughout the day, if you're moving throughout the day, you'll stay here. And that's a good place to be, because then you're not going home at 7 o'clock. You just like fall on the couch like, where is my pizza? Turn on my Netflix.
Yeah.
Like I don't even care anymore, because like you get those days. But yeah.
Yeah, and I think too is I have never managed to fit into my schedule going to a gym. you know, like the actual.
It's also a scary place.
Yeah, well, but.
I don't go to a
No, it's okay.
No, it's a scary
Even-
place.
Even aside from all that, it's like, that seems like it's whole, I go there, it's an activity I have to leave. My favorite hack that I've loved is just, I have the luxury of being able to step out for lunch usually, and it's not a big deal. And so instead of beelining to where I'm going, I will detour and do a mile through a neighborhood to get to that place.
Yeah.
Listen to a podcast like you said, and then that way, before I know it, I'm eating lunch, but it's like, yeah, but I just got a decent 20-minute walk in or something like that.
Some sunshine.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
Sunshine,
vitamin
out of
D.
the office.
Nice. It's
Yeah.
beautiful. Yeah. Yeah. All of these things, they keep you. You don't you don't need the boost or whatever. You just can stay at a level that's a functioning human being, and it feels great.
And the note about, you said about sunshine is actually really worth noting. Like, I work nights, and have for years at this point. And it's really important.
Thank you for being at the panel today.
It's really important to like find sunlight and, cause it just being in the dark all the time will lower your mood. And even if you work days, like those facilities tend to be pretty dark and windowless.
Yeah, when I worked nights, I found that I got up. Well, I worked till 3 a.m. Or no, I did till the 3 a.m. shift, so it's not like totally it was a little bit manageable. Yeah, so you still, but you can get up at noon and you have like time, and then you like take that, because you do have your days free, like take advantage of those days that you have free to just sort of do your errands, stay outside, take a walk, whatever it is. But that's I don't know about advantage to nights, but that's like the one nice thing about nights is you can be with the living sometimes.
Yeah, it's not exactly an advantage, but
Yeah,
but
yeah.
I mean,
I'm looking for the silver
but I
lining.
think it's important to be resourceful. So if you are working nights, like that is the one thing you can take advantage of to take care of yourself. And if you're working a more traditional schedule, then you can try to find what advantages that has, which would be hopefully would be better sleep. I know sometimes people end up working until like midnight anyway.
Yeah, I was just listening to your schedules is putting me to sleep right now, just hearing it. Now, I just wondered if anyone had some controversial question or something to wake us all up, something we're not saying, what are we not talking about? Would you say Donald Trump? I think everyone's talking, yes.
I think a really good tool is emotional freedom technique. I don't know how many of you are familiar with that. It's called EFT or tapping. Oh.
For trauma, you mean?
It's called EFT, emotional freedom technique, and we tap on certain points and say things to yourself while you're tapping. And it
Well,
really
I think doing
clears-
something really insane is good for everyone.
Well, it's really,
I know,
it's actually quite widely accepted
Yeah,
in some
no,
circles.
You
It's
just got
very
skydiving
effective,
afterward.
but I encourage everybody to look it up. It's called EFT, and it's something you do on your own in the bathroom when you want to have a meltdown and the producer's out there being an asshole. And it's very effective. It's a very effective way to balance your own energy so that you can come back into a situation with, more centered and more serene.
Yeah, I also would encourage people to do something that you're afraid of doing, but you really want to do. So,
Yeah, actually, when I was working nights in New York City, I developed, in order to cope, I kind of picked up weird habits, or hobbies. I decided I was going to take up photography, and because I would see the sun come up at night, I would take pictures of, just the sunrises and stuff like that. So I also, I was in a play. I just decided, hey, I'm going to audition for a play, and I did all kinds of really weird stuff to kind of make the nights more manageable, if that makes any sense whatsoever, because I really felt at that point in my life it was just so hard to just get through the days or the nights. So yeah, I don't know, so that's kind of how I coped. But also I think now that I've been in kind of an industry, I'm a little bit more aware of where I'm burning out, and I won't accept jobs if I think it's going to be a high stress situation. I won't put myself in that situation. And I think being a little bit pickier about that, and being aware when you go into a job interview, the warning signs that maybe you might be putting yourself in a difficult situation. I don't know.
Yeah,
Standing up for
the
yourself.
second you have the ability to be picky about your work,
Yeah.
be picky about your work.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What about relationships? How do you have relationships with these kinds of scheduling?
I mean, I can talk about when I moved out here in 2012. Me and my girlfriend have been together for a little over 2 years. We moved in together in an apartment, and I was working nights. I was working the 10 p.m. to 8 a.m. shift, the true graveyard shift. And it was just after graduating college, and going from college, moving across the country, because I'm from Wisconsin, so moving 2,000 miles away, working nights, and being in a totally big new place. I did not handle it well, and I really fell into a depression to the point where my girlfriend actually broke up with me. But that was the thing I needed to wake up. That was the spark, and in the moment, that's when I found out that I loved walking, because I love walking my dogs, and I found that passion for things, and I kind of reinvigorated myself. And then, I literally call it time period, Phoenix Chris. That's when, Chris, rose from the ashes and, became a better person. And, 2 months later, me and my girlfriend got back together. We've been together for 6.5 years. So, sometimes it takes something bad to really realize, the good. But one of the things, I didn't do well was I didn't have a life outside of work. When I was in the night shift and I came into that depression, it was, all I really lived for was work. I got up, I went to work, and I came home, I went to sleep, and I didn't have much of life outside of that. I wasn't hanging out with my friends. My relationship obviously soured a lot to the point where, it ended. And finding stuff outside of work was what brought me back out of that and made me the person I was. The person that my girlfriend Lauren had started dating in college was this happy person, and I was not that. I was depressed. I didn't enjoy anything in life, and finding enjoyment in life again is what made me as a person better and happier, and made me worthy of dating her again. So.
Yeah, and I think to that point, what we kind of all have to do, and to that point, and I also want to clarify I think we all need to set a little bit of boundaries for ourselves and to know where our work ends and our life begins. And so to clarify, when I said that you always have to be prepared to stay late, that can't happen every day, right? You can't be, that can't, it's one thing to sort of mentally be prepared so you don't have that pitfall. It's another thing for that to happen every single day, and that's a big problem. And so if that begins to happen, there is a point where you need to start to set boundaries, and it's just a lot of self-preservation, just because, the boundary being, I need to get myself together so that, I can move on with my life and, maybe, I'll get back with my girlfriend, and, there's just things that we all need to, I'm not saying this to be we need to learn, this is something that I had to learn too, and I recently went through it, is that work's not everything, and that you have to sort of establish with your bosses that there are some things that will come before work. My anniversary was coming up, and I said, I am not staying past 6 o'clock tonight. This is my 1-year anniversary. There is no, there's no negotiating this. And so, anyway, I didn't say it like that, but that's what it was. I wasn't going to be staying past 6 o'clock no matter what came up. And so, that's just one of those things. And if you have kids, your kids are gonna come first, and you're gonna have child care responsibilities, and so it's a problem in our industry. It's a problem in our whole country that we do not think about the fact that we are not just workers. We are people with, some of us have parents to take care of, some of us have kids to take care of, some of us have just ourselves to take care of, and so I think together, if we sort of establish this way to set boundaries with our bosses and say these are the things that are important to me. When they come up, this is what's going to happen. And so, in obviously in a nice way, but that's just what it is boiled down to. Because otherwise, that's what's going to happen to us, and that's what does, and it's happened to probably many of us, and happened to me, and it's not a good place to be in. And to sort of mitigate that, I think that's something that we can all work on.
Yeah, I forgot the one point I was going to make, but the other one is really, it's important to keep in mind. Oh, that's what. it's so easy to get sort of like focused on progressing your career forward as fast as you can. I mean, I know there was a time in my life where I was working full time and I had like 3 side projects I was working on and going to school, and at some point you realize like there's no urgency to, or most of the time in life there's no urgency. It doesn't really matter if you become an assistant editor this year or 2 years from now. If it means that you're better able to take care of yourself, like now I don't take on side projects, or I take on 1 side project. And I think that's a lot better way to strike that balance. And it's also though, if you have kids or if you have special circumstances, it's good to recognize that you have options, and like post is a very big field. So I mean, if you find yourself in a situation where you need a more consistent schedule, then maybe you can start working in facility jobs, or there's there's different places in the industry that have more reasonable hours or different sort of flexibility.
I think it's something too, you don't always have this luxury, sometimes you have to take some jobs, but you can usually tell from an interview. Ask a few leading questions, what are hours like, what is overtime like, and even if they may not give you the honest truth, their reaction to that question usually tells you, oh, they're nice people who understand not being on time, or if they laugh at you, maybe you don't want to work there. You know,
Why are you asking about hours? Like,
Yeah.
aren't you willing to work whatever?
Aren't you available 24/7? That's like, yeah. I just, if you went from one job to the next, it was night and day between the expectation, the unset expectation, to the place I'm at now. I love it because there have been times where it's like, it's Wednesday and I'm like, oh, there's this thing this weekend. I'm like, yeah, no problem. Like, we'll find someone to cover for you. And that was just like sunshine coming through the clouds. Of like, you're cool if I'm not here this weekend? No.
Yeah, I had a job last year where like almost the first thing out of their mouth was like, we need you available 24/7. Like, even though we're only paying you for like the work that you do like in the office, like if we want you on the Sunday, you have to be able to come there. And I took the job, but in retrospect, I mean, those are sort of unreasonable expectations. Like, we're so used to them, but like when you think about it like that, so there's something fundamentally wrong with saying like we own you.
Yeah, I was actually gonna say, I got a job offer as a video editor for one of the major campaigns, and political campaign, I'm not gonna mention what campaign, but they wanted me to work 7 days a week from 10 in the morning to about midnight, 7 days a week, and of course, if they won the nomination, you know, if they didn't win the primaries, it would be over in February. If they won the nominations, it would be till November, and it was like year long. And it would have been an amazing opportunity, but I really thought about it, and I was like, I would have no life for a year.
Yeah.
A year of my life, but it would like break my, I mean, it would make my career, like, you know, to work for like.
But break you as a person.
But break me as a person.
Yeah, and
like
then you wouldn't
7
be
days
able
a
to
week.
work after that.
Yeah, but then you have to think.
Oh, and they also said low paid.
Yeah.
Yeah, see, that's the
Okay.
problem, is that you only,
And then
if
it's
you,
also low paid. But then those
Yeah.
are the kinds of things, like you wanna like advance your career, but then you're looking at it like, oh my god, I'm not gonna have a life for a year. And
Yeah.
now it's like, now I'm a little bit more hesitant, because I'm like, no, that's not worth it to me anymore. It's
Yeah.
just not.
yeah, has anyone seen the oatmeal, comic, the paid and exposure? And then the
Yeah.
guy tries to pay like the exposure with,
It's
like,
exposure
it's
bucks.
exposure, like basically paid for a hot dog with exposure dollars.
Oh, I didn't accept these. I
Yeah,
didn't real money.
I need real money.
It's like the only industry where like people's like, oh, I can pay you not money but exposure.
Yeah,
You
you
know,
have experience.
You know, it
Yeah.
doesn't work.
I mean, that's useful.
But it's
when
also
you're-
like,
when
how
you're
much is your
first
life
starting
worth?
out, I suppose. But like, you have to draw the line fairly early on. Like, no, I'm not working for free. Like, I value my own life as equally as I value my career. And I think once you realize that, hey, I'm like a human, and life isn't about work, then you become a little bit more flexible in what you're willing to accept, and a little, I don't want to say less ambitious, but not so like attached to a certain idea.
Yeah, and I think that comes a lot with experience. Like, if you're 22 and you've never worked in the industry, like, yes,
Yeah.
you will do anything for anyone, whatever amount of dollars, like, don't care, I'll do it. But at a certain point, like, if you've worked a couple jobs, even if you just move into a new industry, like, when I first started in scripted, my second job, I ended up telling them that I was gonna get one job, and then I ended up getting a better one, and so a week out, I said, I can't do this job, I'm gonna have to go to a different show. And the amount of stuff that I got on the phone for saying I've gotta go in a week, and where are we gonna find an assistant editor who knows Final Cut? I was like, I don't know. I don't know. Walk out of your office and
They
swing a
don't
bat,
exist.
I don't know,
They
you'll
don't
find
exist.
one, yeah. So, but I was like, I just got phone call after phone call about how terrible I was. And this is one of those, and I was like, I felt bad about it. I was like, God, what did I do? And I went into all my different editors, like, what did I do? What did I do? Like, I can't believe I did this. I gave them a week. Like, what's going on? And they're like, pshh, you'll be fine. They're not the only gig in
Yeah,
town.
exactly. I mean,
Don't worry
you
about
you don't
it.
sign a loyalty oath.
Exactly.
I mean, yes, you want to try to be as loyal as you can to certain people, but I mean, it is a freelance industry, and it's stupid to
Yeah.
refuse an opportunity
Yeah.
that you can take. I mean, sure, try to ease it as you can. You can try to find a replacement or let them know as early as you can. That actually happened to me last year. But like,
Yeah.
you need to. There's a balance that you have to be able to take that opportunity when it comes.
Yeah, exactly. And you have to think that, like, you're a valuable asset too. And so a friend of mine that night, they said, and I was like upset, I was like, I just burned this bridge, this big bridge. And he's like, no, you didn't. Sounds like they burned a bridge with you. And I was like, yeah, you know what, they did. Like, I'm not gonna work for them. I'm not gonna work for people who yell at me. Like, because what, they had to spend their lunch break finding one other like, there are a lot of us out there. Like, it's just, so it's just like realizing that, like, you are actually really important. Like, if you have a skill that is really, if you're really good at your skill and your job, like, you are important to the company. It's not one-sided. It goes both ways. Like, you bring value to them, and they, I don't know, I think we all as an industry, I think we all as like a post community can sort of like
Yeah.
make that
And
known
I think,
to our
I think good
higher
editors
ups.
and good producers, they recognize
Yeah.
that it's a freelance industry, and like, I mean, obviously they're not gonna be like rooting for you to leave on short notice, but or praying for it, but they're usually happy for you.
Yeah.
So and those are the people you want to work for if you have a choice of who you work
Yeah,
for.
that's the other side of the coin. If you leave early and the producer said, no, it's a great job, you're gonna get to cut more, like, go do it, it's fine.
Yeah, exactly. Last year, I got an opportunity to assist on a feature and I hadn't worked on a feature before as an assistant. And I told my boss, and I mean, he was just like, go! Like, we'll figure out what's going on here, but like, take it. And it's really great to have those kind of people around you.
Yeah, so, don't let, yeah. So those people who are mean to you,
Yeah,
it's them, not you.
work for the mean people as little as you can.
Yeah. Unless they pay you really well, no, don't.
I think it's also, I think it's worth, I mean, I think there's a certain point where you have to like recognize that even if they are paying you well, it's not worth it.
Yeah, it's not worth it.
Like, I mean, even if you're new and you're just starting out, like, if you're at a point where, like, you've been working for months for this, I mean, I have a friend who works in reality, like, on set, and she works 18-hour days, 7 days a week, and it's like, at some point, you have to just say no, regardless of if they pay you well, if it's gonna help your career, like, you have to take care of yourself, and maybe you have to take a lesser job, but it's better for yourself in the long run.
I mean, like at the end of your life, are you gonna look back and think, man, I'm really glad I got that credit on that show? Like, is that what matters, or is it the fact that like you had a fulfilling life from like, oh, I felt good as a person most of my life?
And build relationships and
Yeah.
grew yourself.
Yeah.
That's a good takeaway. I just wanted to throw out to you guys if you got any other questions for us as we wrap up, or thoughts or points for our wonderful panelists.
That's not it. We talk about everything.
I think we covered a lot of good ground here, guys. I really want to thank you for your involvement and for your coming as well. Kylie might have some final words, thanks.
Yeah, you done? Well, this was really great. I think that it's perfectly clear how important this topic is. I mean, things were getting a little lively in the audience here. So I wanted to leave some time after the panel for you all to discuss some of this with the panelists, with Shane, who's here and has already offered any assistance connecting you with people. Just if you're local, we have a Blue Collar Post Collective meetup next Saturday. It's just a social meetup, not an educational event, although it can also be educational because it is happy hour the whole time. It's at 6 p.m. in the Powder Room in Hollywood, just down the street from here. We have them every month. So you can always know, you can come to the powder room and hang out with some people and talk about anything but work. And next month, we're going to have another panel. It's going to be about, sort of about age discrimination and relevancy, how to get in when you're young, once you're established, how to stay relevant. Because there's a little bit of push and pull on both ends of that. So Erin is going to be on that panel, so you should talk to her about her experiences. So we'll have more information about that, exactly what day. It's going to be here. It's going to be on a Saturday afternoon again. So we hope you'll make it to that one too. So thank you so much. And thanks for the people that were in the chat. We had so much conversation in the iPhone. All right, thanks guys.